So, we're just going to jump right into it. Welcome. My name is Simone Rios, and I am the gallery manager here at Art Space 111. I want to thank you all for taking the time to come to our artist panel talk tonight. So we are going to be listening to our distinguished panel with Rusiloski, Angel Fernandez, and Jim Woodson. Tonight, we sit amidst two concurrent exhibitions with intimate connections between abstraction and the artist. Surrounding us is Jim Woodson's show, About Time. No stranger to the avant-garde, Woodson has left an indelible mark on the history of art here in Fort Worth. He moves beyond realism of landscape into abstraction through color, gesture, and memory. He taught at TCU for over 39 years, and his work is collected by the Modern Museum of Art in Fort Worth, and 7 of his pieces are at the Burlington Northern Santa Fe Railway offices in Fort Worth. And additionally, he was recognized as the official state artist of two-dimensional work in 2013 by the Texas Commission of Arts. What makes these shows is the connection between medium, schooling, and art. Rusiloski was a student of Jim Woodson's, and I firmly believe Rusiloski is one of the most underrated and talented abstract artists to come out of Texas, if not the country. And I stand on business when I say that. Rusiloski is a tenured professor of art at Baylor University. Although most of the work is created in the desert, Rusiloski's work is undeniably nautical and atmospheric, just like my dreams. She takes great pride in the brushstroke and can be masters like Cy Twombly, and her work pairs with her husband, Angel Fernandez, in unexpected yet poignant sculptures. In contrast, Fernandez's work is drawn to the synthetic, like tires and children's toys on an intimate scale. Along the lines of Klaus Oldenburg and Duchamp, Fernandez's work electrifies the space through play and unexpected found material. The cyclical formal shape of tires are important in terms of materiality and form, but also work conceptually as traces of humanity. These mediums are inextricably linked by this practice, lineage, and synthesis of the work. Also a professor of art at Tarrant County College, his work has won second place at the Third Coast Biennial. I give to you our fantastic panel. We get a round of applause. Thank you all for hanging in for that one. There's like so much to say that I had to be a little long-winded on the intro. So let's just jump into it. And I'm basically gonna ask a question and we're gonna pass everything around. Although your work is vastly different from each other, it seems as if the desert is the place of inspiration. So can we talk about like why the desert has served you all in terms of the practice and the shows we're about to see?
I think Jim should go first.
What's the question?
So the question was, why does the desert serve as such inspiration for your work?
It's been.
So Jim, you wanna? There.
Is that what you're doing?
Stand right here.
It's been my inspiration for a long time. I was going to Big Bend every year. As soon as my classes were over. I didn't even stick around for graduation. I would have Big Bend every year. And so I generated a lot of work from Big Bend. And then we built a house and studio in Abiquiu, New Mexico. And so I moved from one desert scene to the next. And even though I really loved to paint the Big Bend landscape, maybe even more, the landscape in Abiquiu is much more colorful. It's much more colorful. And so we look across Abiquiu Lake at Ghost Ranch, and it's a spectacular place. So all of these paintings are generated from, I don't think there's a Big Bend painting in here, but these are all relatively new paintings. And what else can I say about them? I'll hand this over to Wendy.
Thank you, Jim. Okay, so first I have to acknowledge that, I wouldn't be here in Texas if it wasn't for Jim. I literally moved to Texas, for those of you who don't know, to study with Jim at TCU. So when I moved here from Pennsylvania, many years ago now, more than 20, we'll put it at that, I had heard of Big Bend, and I had heard of the desert. I had another professor, George Sorrells, the one who encouraged me to come here to be with Jim, and he had been out to Big Bend. So for me, it took us, and my husband, Angel, we talked about how many years had we been in Texas before we went to Big Bend?
30.
Yeah, for him, he was here 30 years before he went there, and I didn't go there until 2017, and I had moved here in 2002. And I actually was resistant to go out to Big Bend, partly because, you know, Jim, others had been painting it. So it's kind of an interesting story that we were supposed to go to Mexico, and that didn't work out. And Angel said, "Well, we should just go to Big Bend, you know." And I said, "Oh, I can't do that. And, you know, I don't know." And he convinced me, and I mean, I really did cry. It was just, I'd never seen anything like it, and I connected with the place just immediately. And I think within less than a year, we had bought property there. So that was, and then we even bought a second property, you know, just to be sure if we couldn't get to the most remote property, we could like get to the other one. So I'll hand off to Angel to give his thoughts on that.
So I grew up in Chihuahua, so on the other side of the desert, and the other side, we call it the other side, el otro lado. And I had been looking at the mountains, where the mountains meet the desert. And so when we finally went, the State Department advised against going. We wanted to go to the Copper Canyon and check out the waterfall, like the one, you know, this tiny spout of waterfall, Cascada de Basasiachi. And the State Department advised us against, you know, traveling because of violence and kidnappings and anyhow. So we went to Big Bend and we literally cried. Like, I mean, I know that, you know, it's not, we're not exaggerating. We couldn't leave. We didn't want to leave, and we felt this immediate connection. And I can't wait for Thanksgiving because it's like we're on our way out to the desert like immediately, and in December we're going to go back out, you know, again. And so we're drawn to that space.
Yeah. No, and it's, you know, I feel.
I just want to say we're in this space, and I think I don't know if Dennis is here or not, but Dennis owns the Big Bend. He's done so much beautiful work. It's just we're all sort of followers of him, I think, in that sense.
You know, he certainly is a juggernaut. You know, he's quiet, but whoo, you know, do not tell him nothing because, you know, he is fierce when it comes to his artwork. And so I kind of get your hesitation of not wanting to almost feel like a cliche if you go into it because you're standing on the shoulders of someone like Dennis Flagg.
Right.
You know, so I totally get that. But you do it in such a way through abstraction. And I have a question for you, Jim. Your work feels very David Lynchian, in my opinion. So the director, David Lynch, he always said, the way you paint is interesting to him because of the aspect ratio. Like, you have these moments of realism that are really compartmentalized, either the upper third or the bottom third of a painting. Can you talk a little bit about those decisions and, you know, how the abstraction, you know, really comes into focus?
I'm going to try to give a short answer to this because it is really complex, but in general terms, I think I'm trying to get a sense of the paintings of what's going inside of my head that's kind of conflated onto the surface of the landscape. And try to make a distinction between thinking and thought. And thought is something that has happened, And I try not to paint out of thought, but in thinking. So the thinking takes place at the end of the brush, and I try to get out of that. So that becomes some sort of I don't know, kind of almost like a kind of a Gorky kind of response. I don't know. Maybe that's enough about that. I don't know. I mean, I can keep going on it, but I think I'd rather just let stand. Maybe people will ask me questions at some point, and I could expound it further.
Yeah. No, I mean, that's what always was really striking, is because I look at your work and I'm like, wait, that's like perfectly in focus, but then you just get kind of mesmerized through this abstraction, which also, you know, it's its own landscape. It's like you're kind of like this duality between the mind and then this like aspect of realism in your work.
And I might say that most of these paintings have the horizon line pushed way up to the top.
Yeah.
And that opens up a lot more room for me to explore on the bottom. And I attempt to start every painting in a different way, so I get in a rush to see what the painting is going to look like. So if I start in a different place every time, then I always end up someplace else.
Yeah, no, I love that, because I always think about like, what is like your control? Like, do you have a map of what you do? And then, you know, to pivot to winter here, what I think is fascinating about your work is that it's made in the desert, but it always, every single person, like it's nautical, it's a ship, it's water, it's a sail. Like, how did you come to that tension in the work to be making, and I know before 2017, but for this work specifically, for Sublime Desert Synthesis, can you talk about that?
Sure. So, you know, I really feel like all my paintings have just continued to evolve over time, and that I know a lot of times it's easier to talk about works in a series. I'm looking at Jim because I'm thinking he maybe understands this, and that I never feel like, oh, I made this series and it stopped and now like I'm done with that and I'm moving on to the next one. I feel like every painting just kind of feeds into the next painting. And you know, my earliest work where I started, you know, thinking about landscape and the horizon, which is well more than 20 years ago, you know, I was looking at space and horizon and thinking about the physicality of the paint and the mark making and how can I give a sense of landscape, but then include, you know, gesture. I think many of you know I had a dance major in undergrad as well, so I was a double major in, you know, dance and painting, which my family had great ideas of the prospects I would have as a dancer and painter. You know, it was so practical. But anyhow, you know, that idea of movement in space was, you know, always very important, and I had become kind of obsessed with the horizon line. And this is about when I saw Jim's work, you know, and really thinking about, is there a place where abstraction and landscape can meet, and what would that look like? And, you know, initially my inspirations were coming from, even though I was in Pennsylvania, and Pennsylvania is beautiful, and you have all those great mountains, I was captivated by the shore, you know, the Jersey Shore, any of the coastlines. Like I would cry when I had to come back, because I think I loved that open space that I would see. And then, you know, I went out to Minnesota, to the Boundary Waters, and I took a book with me to read and could never even read one page, because I just wanted to look at that landscape. Many people know I was a whitewater rafting guide too.
Oh my gosh, I remember that.
And yeah, and I, you know, very clearly I thought, well, if painting doesn't work out, I'll just be a river guide, you know, because it made total sense, you know, the way that I could move through that space and watch the change. So, you know, this idea of tension and sublime and being on the edge, you know, of what was dangerous. You know, so then eventually, you know, getting to Texas and having that great open space, I loved it, you know, immediately. And I remember even flying home to Pennsylvania and coming back and feeling relieved to be back in Texas and see that open space. So then, of course, you know, out to the desert, it was even more so. And to me, that, you know, my work has always been about, you know, being in the moment, but also overlapping with memories of all the different places and experiences, and whether it's still, you know, I saw on that same trip where we went to Big Bend the first time, we had also gone out to Niagara Falls. We were like on a quest for waterfalls, and ironically we end up in Big Bend, right? I had seen the Frederick Edwin Church painting of Niagara at the Kimball in a show, and had thought, I need to go back to Niagara Falls again and see it. So we were there, and the fireworks and the mist, and I still like think about that and what those colors were like. So I think everything is that synthesis, and I had those in the earlier paintings, the boats and the ships, and this idea of movement and journey had sort of developed out of really thinking of a vertical contrasted with that horizon line.
Yeah.
That was a lot of talking.
No, I love it because I feel like there is this sense of danger about your work. Like, I think that's what makes me excited, because honestly, I'm gonna say this, abstraction, you gotta be really good. You know, there's too many frauds out there, period. I'm gonna say it. And I feel like Art Space, we represent some of like people really dangerous artists, which I really like. You know, there's this aspect of survival in the desert or the water. You know, there are these things to be respected, which Angel brings me. So I am personally so excited because I have been dying to show more sculpture at our gallery. And when the show was happening, things fall through, life happens, and Angel was like, yeah, like, and I'm like, do you want to like have a show? Yeah. And so Angel's work, like, which I think is a big deviation from, which I believe is still an abstraction. Like, I believe what you do is in that vein of abstraction. Can we talk about the materiality and what ideas you try to convey, whether it's through, you know, repurposed toys or, you know, cyclical. So, okay, I'm gonna like bring myself back because I am like been wanting to ask you these questions, but can we just talk about materiality?
So as a sculptor, you know, that's all we do is we deal in materials, the different, the baggage the different materials bring to the table. Those pre-established relationships that we may have with something, whether it's a toy that's been loved on by, you know, by our children, a toy that, you know, annoyed me in its first, you know, iteration, its first existence. Like, there's all those like red dragons that are around, right? And so for me, so I grew up like super poor, like a lot of us did. And so to see my children get and acquire so many toys, like it still annoys me, right? I'm just like, it's like, you know, you guys don't understand, you know, you didn't grow up, you know, I had one toy. And it was like, you know, the broken end of a broom, and we used it as like this. And so from like from early on, you know, there was this connection to like materials and the value of materials. And so this idea of repurposing, upcycling, thinking about sustainability, and again, it keeps going back to the desert. This, you know, when you're out in the desert, those are, you know, I know many of you have been to Big Bend. Like, you're always aware of how much water you have, how much food you have, how much shade you have. You know, everything becomes so much more important. And so, again, bringing it back to materials. I've been working with fabric for a long time, mostly because of those, again, pre-established connections that we may have. The vinyl has always been, I mean, I've been working with vinyl since 2002. It's been 20 years of exploring vinyl, and it, you know, it doesn't like go away. You know, it's a nasty material. Like, when you kind of think about it, right, we're probably all sitting on it, you know, somewhere. We have, you know, we interact with it. We, you know, fabric, we wear it. We use it to conceal things. And so I've always been interested in those qualities of the material. And then coming back to the toys, you know, that we have a lot of toys. We have toys everywhere. We have plastic balls from like ball pits that are no longer utilized. We have Tickle Me Elmos that you'll find them in the sculptures. There are elephants. There are little red dragons from Great Wolf Lodge that at the time I was like, we're gonna spend $40 on this thing, and
6 times?
60. Yeah. And so there are at least 4, 5, 6 of these dragons around, and it's this. And so bringing it back to art, that's like, how many ways can I reinterpret the same material with different sensibilities? One of them has a pair of boots attached to it. Another one has a piece of black vinyl and the plastic balls connected to it.
Like, there's something about your work that's like both, like, I think it's dangerous. You have like these spiny spikes, you have these bones, but then you have this juxtaposed or adjacent to a child's toy. And there's something very tragic about that. Like, I think a lot of people might see your work at first glance and think, oh my gosh, there's this incredible sculpture of a teddy bear and all these balls. But when we start talking about the work, there's a lot more in there in terms of whether that's survival, whether that's repurposing, and why we have to do those things. Can you discuss, like, the bear has been kind of a hit among, it's like kind of a showstopper. Can you discuss a little bit about the decisions behind and the materials of that piece?
So did any of you watch The Last of Us, the show? You familiar with The Last of Us? Yeah. Right, and the clip. So I've always been like completely grossed out by biological forms, and yet I love exploring them and making sculptures that relate to them. So I find them incredibly, like the vinyl that I utilize, it's repulsive, it's gross, it's icky, it's yucky, but it's also like, it enthralls me at the same time. The materials are shiny. With that piece in particular, I was thinking about this sort of cancerous, organic, growth mass that becomes the head of the figure. But at the same time, it's like, well, I'm also using these plastic balls that are like fun. It's a kid's ball pit. They're enticing. They're shiny. And then I was thinking about the movie Up, which we've seen a whole bunch of times. But it's this like inverted version. It's like the Stranger Things, the upside down version, right, of this thing, and it's repulsive and it's like scary. But at the same time, it's incredibly symmetrical and it's balanced. So back to those like artistic concerns that we have.
Yeah, I really feel like pop culture exists in your work in a very forward way. And to me, like, I see America when I see your work, because you see bones, you see something that was made in a tough landscape, but then also you see just the absurd, like a McDonald's. Your work is like you know what I mean? Like a McDonald's and an Oasis or something. And I mean that with the purest intentions, but I think it's a really honest kind of way of like looking at identity as well. And so I think that like in Sublime Desert Synthesis, I feel like Winter's paintings create this atmospheric place that these sculptures exist in. I feel like the work amplifies each other. I had to move all the sculptures out because we had a wedding happen, and I was like, no. Like, I was like, absolutely not. Like, I immediately brought them back as soon as I could, because I feel like there's something really dynamic happening of like seeing these, through this kind of abstraction. And so, can you talk about, there's one piece called Orange Ladder and Agua Fria, and can you guys talk about working collaboratively? This was a funny story, and I've been like dying to. I can actually, if you want to keep one and the other, whatever, or no, okay. But there's a piece in there, and it's a collaborative piece, so it has Angel sculptures and Winter's paintings, and I just want to hear about the synthesis of that and how that's even possible. Like,
well, so I think we started with a different piece. It's not in the show, where I wanted Angel to try out, or I don't know how we even decided. Why did we decide to take a painting and rip it up and make it into a sculpture? I don't even know. We were like, that would be cool. And I feel like we should have brought this piece. But anyway, and it was a good piece too. Like it was like a Hunting Art Prize finalist painting, if any of you know the Hunting Art Prize. And we took one of those, and Angel made a sculpture out of it, and and then we were like, okay, well, what else can we do, right? And then we started thinking about, well, how can we join them together? But we have a lot of playful banter, right? Always, like he loves to say the things like, painting is something that you back up into when you're looking at a sculpture, right? Right? Or painting is so 2D, right? Yeah. So anyhow, we have a great relationship, together that way. But he tends to push my buttons, with stories of like I'll say, oh, what do you think when he comes in? He's like, well, your brushstrokes look kind of cowardly on that one.
Yeah.
What? So.
It's just twice.
So, as much as, people will think, oh, it's so fun, it's so cute, but we have some, and I think with that piece in particular, back to this piece, there was just a lot of back and forth, right? Like, who went first? Did you go first?
Yeah, that I got mad because she was like painting over my stuff. I'm like, why are you painting over my things? So, respond to them, work around them. And I have to point out that it was when we saw Benito and Janet like working together, collaborating on works. And it was like, oh yeah, we can do that. And it was just like, man, it's like, how do they do this? Because we struggled. Like it wasn't easy. Egos kind of got in the way. But eventually
I don't remember how we stopped. Do you remember how, because he would be like, that's that's it. Like we needed one of the last things was the orange ladder, right?
Yeah.
But then,
Which is one of my favorite, like of the composition. I feel like that was such an important piece to come.
and we do work well together, but they're still yet.
Yeah, I feel, so I'm going to project here, I feel like that piece is really successful, but I love hearing the fight that it took, because I feel like all artists have that with the work, period. I feel like we're always kind of fighting this, what we have in our mind versus maybe what is, being rendered. I feel like that's just a boxing match in general.
Well, and I think I always tell him to do things that are, unrealistic, too, right? I'll be like, well, you should, do this and that, and I don't really have any idea what it takes to do that. And he's like, no, right?
Yeah, sometimes. but she's usually right.
Well, and on, the idea of collaboration, I wanted to move back to Jim and your collaboration with composer Darius Holbert. So there's a couple pieces in the show that I think are really, really special. And even though, a lot of times people talk about abstraction, whether it's an emotional thing or what they're thinking about, but can you talk about how your ellipses literally form a score?
I did these paintings that were 10 feet long and about, I think 36 feet high. And I had a kind of a waking dream of ellipses, and like a field of ellipses. And immediately it came into my mind, these could be superimposed on a landscape. And an ellipse is a circle turned on its side, so it's spatial by its very nature. And so I began this series, and I had the idea that instead of having a title, you could play somehow. I got a little keyboard and thought, well, I'll see what I can do. I knew within 3 or 4 minutes that was not going to work. And I had a woman, actually, a collector here in Fort Worth that bought some paintings, and I was talking to her about it. She says, I've got this, nephew, I can't remember, but a relative that lives in Los Angeles, and he's a composer. And I think he'd be really interested in doing this project. So anyway, we got together, and there's a little film, and it's just called the Woodson Holbert project, and you can look this up online, and he tells you how he used the ellipses as a way of composing the music. And I didn't really care what kind of sound it created, but him being a composer, he wanted it to be more like music. So anyway, the painting that's around the corner where there's three of us together, that's one of the paintings that is an example of that. But it's really it's a very interesting thing to go online and look at it.
Yeah.
So.
And we have the QR code right underneath the label, so you can see exactly what he's talking about. And it has, literally like the playing of this visual score, I would say.
Right.
Yeah.
Is that enough one?
Yeah. That was great. That was great. So now I kind of want to open it up to a Q&A from our audience. So if you have any questions, just raise your hand and we'll just go. Yeah.
Okay, I have seen these Jim's paintings as they are starting. And it seems like to me that the top part, you kind of know what you're going to paint. You have a reality.
Right.
And it seems to me also that in this blank part, you start creating somewhat realistic forms, whether they're faces or figures or whatever. And then you work those. And my question is, when you begin a painting, you have a pretty good idea of the top. But as you develop this more realistic field, do you know where it's going? Do you know the palette you're going to use? Or does it just kind of emerge from that interaction between the forms and your thoughts?
I think that, I said earlier that, I don't know exactly where these are going to go, and I start them all in a different way. The painting that's behind me, I did earlier paintings that had figures in them, and this one started out that way, and this was a challenge to me, and I struggled with this painting because the figures were just too much there, and I really wanted to have a sense that things were in flux, things were changing, I wanted the viewer to have an experience of the painting as being something in process. So there was no real still place for you to stop. And
so in your process, you go between that, I don't necessarily call it an underpainting, but those figures and the more abstract, and you try to achieve some tension between them. And oftentimes it seems like that they lean toward the abstract a lot more than maybe the figurative. So you experience that tension as you paint it, and that's what you want in the final painting?
Yeah, I guess that would be one way of putting it, I think. I just think, in a certain way, if you're a landscape painter, I think there are a lot of better landscape painters around than me, just pure landscapers. But to me, it's more like if you get up close to one of these paintings and you lose the landscape, that's the way I'd like the paintings to be experienced. You get this sort of gestalt of the whole thing, and then as you get closer to it, it sort of dissolves, and you start to see the activity of the brush and the color and all that painterly stuff. And I don't know, I think that the trick for me comes in trying to come to some kind of a resolution, because you can't literally come to a resolution, I don't think, with the way I'm thinking about making these paintings. So to try to find a stopping place And my painting is about painting over and over and over and over. And so there's an element of memory that's involved there as something that was there earlier and only there exists in parts, you know, and so is that kind of a question?
Yeah. And so, I guess the final question is, maybe the answer is you really don't know where it's going to go.
Right. No, it's what drives me to make a painting, because I want to see what it's going to look like.
Okay, and so how much is that reflected in the palette you use on a particular painting? Because, you know, I see a lot of connections between the palettes.
The color.
So, I mean, do you know that when you painted, you know, that one, you painted that one, that you're going to basically use the same palette?
Well, I don't know exactly what you're getting at, but basically I have a very, very limited palette. And when my students were struggling with color, I would limit their palette, and then so the limited palette means that they have to paint they have to make every color by putting colors together. And so basically that's what I do. I have a palette of about 6 or 7 colors that I make all of these colors from.
Yeah, I guess my question had to do more with the general tone, the general color of a particular thing.
Say that again.
I guess my question had to do with, do you know when you start that painting down there that it's going to have a lot of the same colors and tones?
No, I think, you know, when I was in graduate school, I had a professor that said, "Hey, Jim, you think you might be colorblind?" There's color here. And so it made me so self-conscious. I got all these books on color theory, and my color just got terrible. And so, you know, I began to sort of think about temperature and color. And so, you know, most of the color was derived from putting something cool next to something warm. And by that, I mean, you could have orange and pinks, and some of them can be warm and some of them can be cool. It's not like they have to put something blue next to something red or something. But I think that, to me, it got much simpler for me to think about it that way, just in terms of the temperature of the color.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm really, that's probably my favorite piece, by the way. It's lucky that it's right there behind you and everything. I love the color. It looks like I've seen that color before out there, maybe after a rain. Very rare, but the figures are what intrigued me. Was there a certain inspiration about the figures that you've got in there that are the obvious, slightly different colors and stuff?
It was the one painting in the show that was my biggest struggle, just to get it to be, because I wanted to start out in such a way that I wouldn't know how to paint my way out of it. You know, I just have to try to figure out how to put them in there and then start taking them away. And I did document this as I sort of went along, you know, so like in the stages. So I thought it'd be interesting just to see what it looked like, you know, through that process.
It's one of my favorite parts of art is addition and then some subtraction.
Yeah.
Anyway, good job.
Huh?
Good job.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah. And then, yeah, back.
So on the note about your inspirations, so I'm also from Albuquerque, and I was curious as to like what specifically about Albuquerque and like kind of the desert area surrounding it inspired you, because some of these paintings on the left side, it looks like petroglyphs, like bandolier or like pictured mountains, and I was like, I guess like what certain like land features or like stuff like that like inspired you?
No, I couldn't hear all of that.
So she,
I guess, what specific features about Albuquerque inspired you?
What inspired you?
about Albuquerque. She was asking, or Abiquiu, or what inspired you? Sorry. I wish I could bring this down to you. Here, do you want to come up here? Come up here and ask your question. It's a really good one.
My apologies.
Yeah. So it's. So he does most of his work in Abiquiu. But yeah, but I see.
Sorry, I was wondering what specific like land or like land features textures or like some about Abiquiu like inspired your works, and like it was stuff like petroglyphs, which like I see over there, and like from New Mexico and things of that nature.
Well, I don't know, all of that is there, and I don't think I think about it, quite like that. I just, I don't know. There's some petroglyphs that are very near where we live, and in the general area, there's petroglyphs everywhere, and I think it probably comes sort of by osmosis, kind of comes in.
Can I ask a question? What is a petroglyph for our audience?
It's a chipping away of the surface on a rock to leave.
Got you. Okay, thank you.
I'm sorry, did
Yeah.
that kind of address, I'm not sure exactly how to
I think also what she meant is, especially in this one right here, you have these strong, like a petroglyph, now that I understand. They're very strong gestures, versus like this one, I feel like you have like the landscape, it's more of impressionistic, where this one feels like very strong, and with these blacks kind of carving maybe into the landscape versus the blending that's happening in others. So what maybe, and I'm sorry, maybe I'm not getting at it, but just, what inspires those types of gestures versus more of a blend? And I mean, you don't have to know, I'm just, okay.
Intuition.
Yes.
I don't know, they just, because I start them all in a different way, they just come out different. I mean, I think that when you look at all of them, there's a certain commonality about them, but I think, just because I start them all differently, they're just gonna come out differently.
And I think we all can take a lesson from Jim on just let go. You know what I mean? I think that's like a really big, important thing. And I'm sorry, I wish I could like split the show so we could also see Winter's and Angel's work, but like this was like a bigger space and all that kind of stuff. So, I apologize that that's not in the front, but yes.
I have a question for Winter. Can I ask
Winter, yeah.
Yes, her colors are just so fabulous, and if you've been in the show, you will see the colorful palette that she uses. So Winter, another color question for you. Is it subconscious, is it conscious, is it a blend? Can you tell us a little bit about the decision-making process with those colors?
Well, I will answer that. I want to say something in relation to Jim's last question, which ties in with mine. As we were talking about Jim's work, it was reminding me something he said to me at some point. You probably may not even remember this because I know we've had a billion students, but he talked about how sometimes, just because you put something there and you work over top of it and you cover it up, it doesn't mean it isn't still there. And that's something that I found, I see in his work, in the layering, this thought of memory and, discovering and rediscovering. And, that is something that, back up, for me in some of the earlier days of my work, putting in the horizon and actually painting a more representational kind of landscape, that was my starting point, that then I worked over top of and found these verticals and these ballooning figures. And, I think back then, in some ways Jim was helping me let go of, certain aspects of it, to be like, it is still there, it's like the bones of the painting, and you like keep going. And so now, as far as color goes, I think it is really intuitive, and I do though, have thoughts of what I'm going to start with. I initially started drawing with charcoal. I love drawing with like fine charcoal first, and I don't sketch much at all. I used to try to sketch more, but I make just a lot of paintings.
Your palettes are amazing. Moody and I, and Marge too, we all had the joy of visiting your studio, and your palettes are like sculptures. There's so much paint, like it is.
Well, and I think it's part of that attachment to the history of the palette and what was there. But I think it is intuitive, and I'll think, I'm going to start with pink. And sometimes you know, kind of some of what Jim has talked about, starting with the, you know, really bright orange first, almost doing the opposite of what I might think to then go over top of it. But, you know, and then I find that I get into a zone of, you know, being in a certain frame of mind with the color intensity that we find a lot, I think, in the current show here. Did that answer the question?
Yes, thank you.
This one, and then Jamie.
Yeah, I have a question for Winter. What makes you gravitate more towards abstract work?
Okay, so I gravitate more toward abstract work because I really, I like the ambiguity of it. And I think that, you know, the reason I'm a painter is that I can say a lot of things in paint that I cannot say in words. You know, and I really feel like that. You know, similar to, you know, music or, you know, a symphony, you know, thinking about all the feelings we can have, all the ideas, everything that, you know, we can connect with in the music. You know, I feel like that with the paintings, just that I can say layers of things, like I can scream in a painting if I want. I can say, you know, I just feel like those paintings for me, you know, not just expressive, but they can talk about many different things that, you know, although I love, you know, I love representational work and I really appreciate it. And of course I love Jim's work and, you know, the aspects of naturalism. That's why I'm here, you know, I was drawn to Jim and the way he was bringing abstraction into this, you know, representational space. But I love the fact that you're not limited and there are multiple interpretations, and that just like music, you can experience it repeatedly and have changing ideas with it.
I thought I'd ask because I'm also an abstract painter, and I know how much of a question it can be.
Mm-hmm.
It can either be really easy or a really long type of answer.
Yeah. Well, how do you feel about it? Do you,
I feel the same way about you in the way where it's very ambiguous.
mm-hmm.
Although there are times where it's so ambiguous you have no idea what you're doing. Yeah.
Feel that.
Yeah.
Well, move on. Yes. Yes.
Yes, so I have like a two-part, so one for Angel and one for Winter. So I noticed in your work, it kind of reminded me at first glance of some pieces I've seen created by Kandinsky, where he did a lot of, and you just kind of answered my question when you talked about, you kind of allow, it's like the ambiguity of it all, but then you let the painting or the colors speak for themselves without having to use words.
Yeah, and I think similar to Jim, you know, I go in there with the structure, like I mean, I'll actually start with the drawing structure, and then I'll be thinking about colors. I mean, I really do have, on one hand, I can say, well, I'm not really sure what's gonna happen, but I usually do have more of an idea than people might expect. Like I know I'm gonna have 3 verticals that are gonna break up this horizon, and I'm gonna put 2 horizons, and I know that I'm gonna be thinking about nighttime. You know, so I will have some associations in mind to get me going with the colors, but then, you know, similar to Kandinsky, you know, I am really thinking about how things respond and interact with each other, and my thought can change as I'm going along, and I can discover things that I feel I need to pull out, you know, and emphasize, and kind of back to Jim again, you know, that idea of like it is still there, and the layering and what builds the painting.
And then the part for Angel, I noticed, you know, the titles of the work, and then there's like this tongue-in-cheek juxtaposition of the title of the work and what I'm actually looking at. And it kind of reminded me of one time I saw I want to call it, I hope I'm not getting it wrong, the avant-garde, the teacup made out of fur, where it's useful, but it's not. And your pieces they're approachable, but not quite. And some of them have this really sweet, look at those, and then you look closer and there's something else underneath it.
Yeah, and you know that started for me in grad school when I was, so I went to school in Massachusetts, and you know I was ready to get out of Texas. I'm out of here. I'm going to like this like liberal, forward-thinking place, and boy, it was very different than what I had imagined up there. And so I met a lot of like resistance, and so you know thinking about like Duchamp, for example, and you know sort of like playful imagery and double meanings and you know, playing with materials and imagery. And so that's how I sort of went into abstraction as well, is that I found that I could do more by showing less in a way, and then also taking those you know, again, I talk about like vinyl and like the ickiness and like the grossness of vinyl. It's in lots of gross places too. Doctor's examination tables, you know, massage parlors, and anyhow. So we have these pre-established relationships again, and things like, you know, thorns and desert life and cacti and, you know, and bones that are kind of, you know, they're about death and dying and time passage, and taking all those elements, and then putting them together, juxtaposing them with, you know, with a stuffed animal. You know, I find great joy in that exercise, and sort of like pushing those boundaries of what I can, you know, make you think about and feel, and then their scale, you know, it's intimate. Like, you know, you want to hold, like, I want you to hold them, like you want to hold them, you want to touch, don't touch them, unless you buy it. But that was something, you know, I like the interaction, you know, the kinetic nature of sculptures, and thinking about Duchamp and thinking about the playfulness of Oldenburg as well. And so that's something that I enjoy, and it just creates a tension of sorts that I think is inviting, is repulsive at the same time, and it sort of like makes you question like what you're feeling as a viewer and what you're thinking as well. So I hope that answers.
You did, thank you.
Yeah.
So here and then there.
So on that note, like, how much do you know about what's gonna happen with your sculptures? Like, how much do you plan, or does it happen organically?
A little bit of both. Like, I have an idea of the materials that I will utilize. Some sculptures are like planned, like I know what the sculpture would look like in the end, sometimes. Other times, and in particular with a lot of the newer work, it is a little more intuitive. Like there's a piece with the antler, you know, that's a small, like, it's a female wolf from Great Wolf Lodge. And you know, it just sort of, I began sort of like pulling and wrapping it, responding to the form, you know, of that antler. That is something I found in our backyard. We have lots of deer that hang out in our property, and again, that idea of like, again, this thinking about sustainability, thinking also about Chicano rascuachismo, which is this idea of making do with the least amount of resources and materials, and you know, it's like how much can we push these materials, and so it just kind of depends on the piece. Sometimes I know exactly what it's going to look like. Sometimes it's more intuitive.
So yeah, I don't know Angel. So in your song Elvis, you talked about a lot. You got inspiration from The Last of Us, kind of like this organic horror almost, and it seems to inspire you through a lot of your other pieces. And I was just kind of wondering where that came from, because it spoke to me.
A number of different places. So some of it is desert life, you know, where you have, you know, you might have something that grows in this really like disgusting kind of organic way. I also thinking about both of my parents passed away from cancer, and so looking at like and that's something I worry about and think about, and this idea of this like uncontrolled kind of, you know, organic growth as well. So back to your question, Michelle, this idea of something that is like kind of really repulsive and organic and uncontrolled, but at the same time it's fed by, you know, imagery that comes from video games and popular culture and HBO Max. Like, you know, it's all, and coming back to what a question that was asked for Jim, you know, about the petroglyphs, and like all that stuff is always there. You know, I still think about Quentin Tarantino's scene of the bride being buried alive, right? And that scene when that nail like goes in through that coffin, like I think about that sound, and I think about the last bit of light and the splintering of the wood, and so those images are like I always like I hold a lot of stuff in, and I think it like makes its way out, with a lot of the work.
That's scary.
It's very scary. Tell me about it. I don't sleep sometimes.
Oh, okay. Marianne,
Yeah.
a bit of positivity here. Okay,
No,
Jim Woodson,
no, I'm kidding.
I get so much strength, I see so much strength in your paintings, and I just think of them, if I ever have a bad day, I just think of the strength in your paintings, so thank you. I appreciate that. And winter, you made my mind work hard for a long time. I don't know, 15 or 20 years. I tried to understand your works.
You came to the gallery a lot.
And finally, I can totally appreciate them.
Well, thank you.
Finally, I worked so hard.
Thank you.
Angel, I'm sorry that you don't know.
That's okay.
Okay.
Yeah. Sometimes it's not having an answer, but asking questions.
Okay.
I think that's what art should do.
Absolutely. Well, fantastic. Well, I think that's going to wrap it up. Thank you all so much for joining this fabulous panel. Can we get a round of applause? All right, and stay a while, hang out. We're not too long, but we're going to be here. So enjoy. Thank you.
Sim Myers.
Yeah, exactly. Come to the front.